All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining today's webinar. So we're going to be going through an introduction to the Gateway to Global Aging Data's kind of a redesigned website, which is available at beta.g2aging.org. I think we just launched this in the last couple of weeks, and it's been kind of a long-term initiative, as you'll see, of our team. Kind of wanting to update and refresh and also kind of build a better website for the research community who are using the HRS family of studies. I'm Tristan Phillips. I'm at the University of Southern California as part of the Gateway team, and Hooman Gol, who's kind of heading the development of our new site for us, will also be speaking as part of this. We'd encourage you to interact with us during the webinar, if you're watching live. So you can do that through the question and answer function or through the chat function. And we're also going to have time at the end for you to ask questions or give us feedback specifically. And this webinar will be recorded and provided on the Gateway. So the motivation for this redesign really came out of a user survey that we did at the end of 2021. And we just wanted to kind of get a sense of how are users using the survey. We included a lot of questions. If you were one of the users who filled this out, thank you for that. And we found that while the majority of users were quite happy with the Gateway, that there were things that we could improve about it. In particular, we had, I think, to me, a higher number than I would have expected users requesting features, like saying, oh, it would be nice if the Gateway had this feature that actually it did have. We also had some users comment that the website was confusing to navigate. Also requesting kind of easier navigation for first-time users who maybe aren't familiar with research data or in particular, the HRS International Network of Studies. They wanted better searching options, both for searching through the surveys themselves and through the harmonized data. They wanted kind of a better comprehensive introduction to just what the Gateway is and more information about how to use and combine different data files. I think people were really asking for, can we have more kind of direct help with combining files and things like that, actually kind of getting to the nitty-gritty of using the data for their analyses. So we kind of took in this feedback and started to think about, okay, so how can we improve the Gateway? I think one clear takeaway that we had is that we could better organize the website itself. The Gateway actually started quite, I could say, humble maybe, in that, I think at the beginning it really maybe only covered 3 or 4 studies, and they only kind of had core interviews. And as kind of this network of interviews, more studies have added across the world, and different types, this same set of studies is doing different types of interviews also. So they're doing life history interviews and end-of-life interviews and harmonized cognitive assessment protocols or HCAP surveys. And so we're trying to, kind of push this into the Gateway. And I think that sometimes, it just became harder to navigate because it kind of all been pushed into one site. So the overall goals of the redesign were to reorganize the information that the Gateway provides. So just think, starting from scratch, what kind of organization makes sense at the current level of organization, current level of information that we have on the Gateway. If you remember the current Gateway site, when you first come to it, if you go to g2aging.org, you get this kind of lovely picture of an older couple, but you get almost no information about what the Gateway does, or offers, or what the HRS International Family of Studies is about. So we wanted to give a landing page which just gives people lots of information. This is also somewhat more consistent with modern websites, that you get a lot of information the first page that you come to. We wanted to include a page specific for new users, and that was easy to find. We did want to add some new tools. So one of the new tools is a harmonized variable concordance, specifically for finding relevant and comparable harmonized variables. And we wanted to kind of expand the frequently asked questions in tutorials. They also just needed an update. So that's kind of the overall goal. And now I'm going to have Hooman is going to kind of join us and talk about some of the back end and some of the work that's gone into, because I think these are the things that kind of I thought about as kind of a non-web development mind. But there's also part of this project which was just making the site run better and making it more secure. So Hooman is going to talk to us about those.
Hello, everyone. My name is Hooman Goel. I'm a software engineer at CSAIL University of Southern California. I'm going to give you a brief introduction to our new website and what we have done behind the scenes. So let's start with the back end of our systems. We have revamped the way we store and manage our data. In terms of storing, we have redesigned our database structure using best practices to improve the overall performance and also have the power to add new features to our website in future iterations. We have also designed a new admin panel so the gateway team can upload or update their data at any time. This will help us to keep our website always up to date. In our new design, we leverage RESTful API architecture to have a consistent user experience within all our other websites, such as COVID and End of Life. For example, you can log into all of our websites using only one user account that you might already have, or you can create one at any time using any of our websites. So let's switch to the front end of our system. So on the public side of our website, we have designed everything from scratch. In order to improve the overall UX or user experience, we have made some major changes. We have updated the overall design as well as the look and feel of our website. In terms of navigation, we have a new header menu, including an improved search functionality to help our end users find the data they are looking for more conveniently. During the design and development process, we focus on having intuitive and consistent design for every single page in our website, and also interactive design wherever it was applicable. Now, Dristin is going to walk us through our new website.
Thanks, Hooman. So I'm going to switch over to just the internet browser here. And this is, you can get to this at beta.g2aging.org. Any of you are available. The first thing you will get is this kind of sign-in prompt. This doesn't require you to have a kind of a special username or to be logged in our system. Basically, it just requires that you've already registered for the gateway. So I can sign in here. If you haven't ever registered on the gateway, you can, of course, do that by just signing up for an account this way. And so once you're logged in, you can then see the new version of the gateway. And the first thing you see is this is the kind of official new landing page for the gateway. And one of the things that we did in the redesign is I mentioned that the studies themselves have started to do different kinds of surveys. For instance, during COVID, they did studies like surveys specific to COVID. So we thought like maybe we're trying to push a little bit everything into one site in a way that's kind of unhelpful. So what we're designing is called kind of subsites, these are coming basically. So we're going to have one devoted, which is already launched, to the COVID surveys themselves, one to the end of life surveys, one to, this is the harmonized cognitive assessment protocol surveys, and one to the life history surveys. And so everything that we kind of see on this kind of main page, which would refer to the core surveys, is going to be mimicked on those. So there would be kind of contextual data, for instance, for COVID specific to COVID, or for cognitive assessment, there could be contextual data or graphs about cognition as part of that page. So some of it is just trying to take a little bit of burden off the main site, because a lot of users, although often we want to use these together, they might just be using the core data plus one of these kind of extra data sets. And then you can also see here we have this graph, which really we just try to give an idea of like what is the Health and Retirement International Family of Studies. So one of the things that you can see is that although it starts in 1992 in the United States, it's like really growing over time. So we're adding more countries. We're getting a lot more respondents. You could also, if you're interested in a particular country, you could just see for that country, hey, when were they? When did they collect data? When were they in the field? And this will kind of be continued to update, but we just wanted to give like a broad overview of, here's what this is about. And then we also kind of highlight what's indexed by the Gateway. So the Gateway indexes 20 different studies. It covers 47 countries, 62 surveys, and that, is almost 250,000 survey questions. And then we kind of present harmonized data, which is kind of like the data files that our team produces to really be able to use the survey data itself comparably between these studies and inside of the study across different waves. There can be changes between different waves of these longitudinal surveys. And so, currently we have 23 harmonized data sets. That's like 40,000 different harmonized variables for 350 respondents. And because they're longitudinal and people are interviewed more than once, it's, almost 1 million observations of people. So we really kind of wanted to impress, especially upon an initial user who might not be used to the HRS International Family of Studies, how broad the scope is. And then we kind of link to some of the kind of functions that we know that people use and like on the Gateway. So you can see here, these are the graphs and tables, and you could go in, if you click plot here, you'll go to graphs and tables to be able to find more. Or change this, introduce different subpopulations. We wanted to give kind of a piece of what's happening on the graphs and tables page, just here on the front page, so people can kind of see the functionality. Similarly for the Policy Explorer, so, we mentioned that there's different types of pension policies. It's currently 56, covering now 12 countries and different policies. And then we kind of just give like a quick preview, and you could go into any of this. And for instance, switch this and find out more about a particular country on this page, but if you really kind of want the full information, you could also just click retirement policies and go to kind of like the full page. We're just kind of trying to push people to things that might be helpful. And then we also highlight the publications that are indexed on the Gateway and then the Gateway blog. The other thing I'll mention is we've kind of redone the navigation totally. So one of the things you'll see at the very top that, as you scroll down, kind of goes away. This is a nice thing that Human built. You can also easily click to currently the COVID site and soon the End of Life HCAP and Life History site as we bring those online too. And also like kind of this kind of persistent help menu, which we'll look at the very end here with some updated frequently asked questions and tutorials is there. And as I mentioned, one of the things that we wanted to do is to really push people to the getting started page for a new user. So we've kind of just built this page for a first-time user to try to say, like, and we built this kind of saying, like, here's like the most used things that we find that users use, from looking at website traffic and from talking to users, and just like a brief overview of what they do. And we're also going to have an introduction video as soon as we've kind of settled on this design, which we're quite close to. So we're going to build kind of like a very, I think short, I think not more than 2 minutes or something, introduction video, kind of here's what the Gateway is, here's what you can expect for a new users, and then some other links to get started. One of the other things that I'll mention is one of the features that we got asked for was like a universal search. So one of the things that the web development team has built is this search. So you could search for something specifically, and then you can see that you could search the website, you can search the questionnaires, you can search publications, or you can search all of them. So again, it's kind of like duplicating many of the features that are already on the website, but kind of giving you more information about it. And then one of the things that we did as part of this redesign is to think, I think one of the confusions that we heard from users sometimes is like, it's unclear to me, like some information is about the surveys themselves and some is about the harmonized data, and that distinction wasn't always clear. And so we kind of divided this main menu here into health and retirement studies, which is really about the health and retirement studies and the surveys and their questionnaires, particularly by itself, harmonized data, which is the data that's produced by the Gateway team, the Policy Explorer, which kind of gives contextual information about these people that's also collected by the Gateway team, and then some additional resources. So if you go into the health and retirement studies, you get this kind of like big drop down with like just some basic information about things. And I'll walk you through kind of most of these pages. Some of them, if you're familiar with the Gateway, will be familiar to you, but some of them will be new. So the first page we wanted is just an overview of like what's the studies. If you're new to the Gateway or new to the HRS family of studies, one of the things that you might know is there's a lot of acronyms, and it's not always clear what they mean. So we wanted some page where you can see what's the acronym, what's the full study name, what countries are included as part of it, and what's the year started. So this is actually information that I think we always should have had more present on the current version of the Gateway that we've indicated here. And of course, you can go into any of these and kind of look at what we call our study overview. So you can see information about what's the sampling frame for the study, when is the core data collected, and what are other types of data that have been collected. So you can see here, we mentioned the Harmonized Cognitive Assessment Protocol. They've also taken some different biomarkers. They've done next of kin interview about deceased respondents. This is an end of life interview. Information about the sample, different data linkages that are part of that study. This is MHAS, the Mexican study, which is quite a few different linkages to different kinds of data. They link to the respondents, how you get access to the data, and what are the harmonized data sets that are produced. So this feature isn't new, but I think we've tried to kind of push this to be a little more prominent on this site. And the next thing that you can see is I think, was it in the first version of the Gateway was kind of the main function of the Gateway, which was just to index the survey questionnaires. So for instance, you could see like wave 1 of SHARE was conducted in 2014. Currently, we're just looking at the core interviews. And you can go in, we could look at, say, the behavioral risk module, and we can see these are the survey questions. So the first thing that's a question here is whether someone has ever smoked daily, and you can find out information about that particular survey question. Also, this chart, you could change, let's say we're just interested in like 2000, the last couple of years. So you can see, what studies already have their survey instruments available from 2016, 2018, 2020. Yeah, most of the studies have conducted a 2020 interview also, but there's a kind of a lag before they get their data out, which is why this isn't quite full yet. And then you could also switch to say, look at like life history interviews, and we could pull this back to 2006, and we can see that HRS did a life history interview in 2014, 2016, ELSA in 2006, SHARE, the European study, they've done 2 actually, one in 2008 and one in 2017. CLOSA, the Korean study, did a job history, and Charles, the Chinese study, did a life history also in 2014. And you can click into any of these, kind of see that survey itself. This is kind of a browsing way to get through the surveys. We still have a search function. So you could, for instance, if you're just interested, you don't want to like browse through, but you know that you're interested in something like smoking, smoking, and let's say you're interested in JSTAR. So this is the Japanese study. You can search this way, and you can see what are the survey questions that are asked in JSTAR about smoking. And then again, you could just click into any one of these about so this is a question of, what age did you quit smoking? To kind of find out, was this asked in your survey? And, a corollary to that is what we call the question concordance, which is something that we have on the current site. So I won't spend too much time on it. But, basically, you can look at different survey questions. Like we could go into cognition, and we could see under the kind of subdomain of memory, we get 4 different survey questions. So self-rated memory, self-rated writing and reading, immediate word recall, delayed word recall. You can actually change this kind of table to, this is a new function. So if we just wanted to see immediate word recall, delayed word recall, we can see what waves it was asked, and then kind of important details that would highlight cross-wave or cross-study differences. So, one of the important things with word recall is that not all studies ask the same number of words. So you can see the HRS asked 20 words at HRS wave 1, HRS wave 2, HRS wave 3, and wave 4. They asked 10 words, and then also 10 words in the AHEAD studies, which were kind of a study that got combined with the HRS. And then we also mentioned things like the words can be read just once. And these are kind of actually important differences. So this is a difference with the MHAS, which all waves asked 8 words, but they allowed the words to be repeated up to 3 times by the interviewer. for the person to get them. So these are kind of like important things to know about differences in the survey questions themselves. We still have our user guides. So these are kind of in-depth things, and we've been adding to this. The most recent one is the subjective well-being user guide, and we're now in the process of actually going back and updating some of these older ones. So many of these are actually in the process of being updated, and I think will come online in the next later this year or the following year, because of course in 2011 there was less studies and less waves, so we need to go back and update these, which is something that we're doing, and you can click to kind of view any of these user guides. And then we have kind of a Get Survey Data page where you can find the link to download the survey data specifically, and then also data access instructions. So for instance, if you're interested in CLOSA, the Korean study, you could click this data access instructions, and you can see a lot of information about how do I actually like click through, and what do I need to click to be able to get access. It's not always clear for different studies. And again, this was one of the things that we heard from users that is kind of like especially hard about or confusing maybe initially about using the gateways. The gateway generally doesn't provide data. So we wanted to give kind of more clear instructions about getting to the data, which we know, that's for a researcher, that's really what you want to get to once you understand the data. So moving from the health and retirement studies to harmonized data, if we go to this overview page, one of the things that you'll see is just what are all the harmonized data sets that are produced by the gateway, and these are for the core data and I should say not only by the gateway, this is by the gateway or by the RAND Corporation, which produces two, kind of the main harmonized data sets for the HRS. So this includes for the core interview, but also for end-of-life data, life history data, and HCAP data. There are also harmonized COVID data sets. Those are on the COVID website. And as we launch these new EOL, life history, and HCAP subsites, we'll kind of move those over there again. So we're kind of not crowding this page. And then you could go into any of these, for instance, and kind of see, what are the different sections, and what does it include, going through it that way. We also built basically a search function. So this is like very similar to what we saw before. So for instance, if we're interested in like maybe questions or variables that are about childhood in the HRS, for instance, we could click search here, and we're going to get variables about childhood. You can see that these are part of the harmonized HRS data set, and some are in the stress section and some are in the childhood section. You can also see there's 75 of them, and so you could choose, to expand. You want to see more of them. We could see all 75 here together, and you can also kind of limit. Again, you could still limit by year. So say if we're just interested in 2016, which was wave 13 of the HRS, you can limit it that way also. One of the new features this is totally new, so this isn't on the current website, the main g2aging.org, is a variable concordance. And this is like a corollary to kind of the survey question concordance. So if you were interested, perhaps like in questions on health and self-reported health, and these are variables, so you're actually trying to use the data here. So we mentioned that under self-reported health, there's actually two variables. So one is called SHLT, and one is called SHLTA, which is the A is kind of for the alternate version. And you can see that different studies actually used different options. So the first one ranged from excellent to poor, and the second went from very good to very bad. And so they're kind of coded a little differently. And this is, we built this page to kind of highlight these differences. So, if you're interested in a particular study, some of these are actually, they ask both of them also, but if you're interested in a particular study, like let's say like you're using the HRS, for instance, it tells you that you're going to find this in the RAND HRS longitudinal file. It's available for waves 1 through 15 currently. And here are other studies that have like this comparable measure. And we also, maybe if there's something particularly different about it, we'll mention it in the notes. For instance, if we go into functional limitations, which is like a little bit more complicated, you can see that there are, let's say there's a note here for harmonized CLOSA. So if we scroll all the way down, this is a much longer chart, we can see that both CLOSA and the MARS study ask whether the respondents need help with these activities, so need help, instead of whether has difficulty with the activities. So this is some of the information that like we have in the code books, but we wanted to kind of provide it on the website in a more helpful way. And so this is a new feature. We hope this is like really helpful, for people doing the research and like finding, what are the variables that I need to use. And again, you can also limit this. It doesn't have, you don't have to see like all of them. You can limit it by study, or if you were just interested in like, let's say just the walking question, you could limit it just that way. And so you have a much shorter table there. We still have our interactive graphs and tables. This feature has not changed that much. Besides, we have updated now to 2018 data. So we've added another year of data for this, and you can still see, this is a kind of a core interview beside contextual data here. And we could change this by saying, like looking at an urban and rural split in housing prices. If we can't do it by everyone, let's see if we can do it by household age, like this here. So only for households that are 65 and older. So you can see this kind of line there just for them. And you could also do it, I assume, by kind of different household age bands. If you 10-year age bands, we could see where they're kind of like, yeah, so here we kind of see that something's different, something's happening different for households of different ages. And you can add or drop this. And this feature works exactly the same as it does on the current gateway. And then we also have a Git data page for harmonized data particularly, where we mention like what's the current version of the harmonized data set itself, links to download the harmonized data set. We have a set of data access instructions specific to the harmonized data sets, and then the harmonized codebooks if you're interested in that. And we have this for core, end of life, life history, and HCAP. As we build those subsites, these parts of this will migrate to the subsites, which are more appropriate for them. The Policy Explorer hasn't gotten any big changes yet, except for the addition of more countries now for the retirement policy series. So now we have kind of 12 countries where we have information. We will shortly be launching our long-term care policy series, which looks at public benefits for persons needing persistent care. And then we're also building sets of policies looking at education, divorce, maternity leave, and COVID, which we'll be adding over time. But this function works kind of exactly the way as it does on the current website. And then for our additional resources, so we still have our publications. This, again, hasn't changed that much. If you're interested in cognition papers, that used MHAS data, we could search for papers this way and find out more information about these papers and get links to those papers. So this hasn't changed that much. We are in the process of updating these also. So I think this is kind of like 15,000 papers, I think, if I remember that right. We are going to be adding like a new bunch of papers to that sometime soon. Yeah, 15,000 currently. For the webinars and presentations, we decided let's just list all of the webinars and presentations and then allow people to search through them. So for instance, if you were interested in like this SHARE study, you could specifically see like what are webinars or presentations that used SHARE. So this is like, you can see this is specific to SHARE. It was an introduction to a SHARE webinar. We've also had an end of life webinar about SHARE for the harmonized SHARE end of life data. We've also had one for the life history data set, kind of compared between ELSA and SHARE. And then we have some webinars, that are kind of used a lot of studies together, and we kind of highlight those here. So we've just added a little bit of functionality. And then you can also see upcoming webinars. Of course, this mentions our current webinar, which is as soon as we wrap up, this will kind of move down to be this webinar, which we'll post the slides and the video for this webinar there. We have announcements and data updates. So what are kind of the new things the Gateway has done recently here. And then we still have our blog, which hasn't changed at all. Our latest, I'll just give a plug here for our latest blog, which we held a hackathon recently out at USC, where we invited researchers to come and kind of work intensively on teams, particularly looking at cognition questions recently. And so we've kind of posted a blog about that here. And I mentioned we wanted to expand kind of our FAQs and tutorials. So we've added some more frequently asked questions that people ask. I think particularly kind of coding questions, like my version of Stata won't open it, what can I do? And we're going to continue to try to update these, especially as people email us and ask questions. We'll continue to add these, where do I download the data? So these are the kind of common questions that I get, that we get as part of the Gateway team. Oh, the other thing I'll mention that I didn't is that we also have an about page, which has information about the team. So we never had quite an extensive page about the team. So you can see who are the PIs, what's the team management. You can see how many people are actually part of the Gateway team. We have a programming team, a research support team, web engineering team. These are the three great people. There's Human. These are the three people who are very responsible for this, as well as Boz Weirman, who was mentioned up on our management team here. And then you can also see kind of our investigative team. So these are researchers in particular topics who are advising us or working to build variables or make comparisons, and where they're located, as well as the advisors for the Gateway. So this is all kind of new information. And then the last thing that I'll mention is that we do have this feedback tab here. So currently, we're in the process, and it's part of the reason for this webinar, of getting feedback on this new version of the site before we move it over and replace the main Gateway. So if you're using it and you like to give us feedback, and you're not in the process of the webinar, this will come preloaded because you've logged in, and I could say like, oh, everything looks great, love it, or you can say, hey, this seems confusing to me, for instance, and you can just give us that feedback and we'll go through it. So I think over the next couple of weeks we're going to be collecting feedback before we implement that, and then actually replace the new Gateway, and we'll start to launch those subsites. So that's kind of the broad overview of the new Gateway website. So I think Human and I are now happy to take any questions if you have them, any feedback at this point. But I hope you kind of enjoyed seeing what this is. This is really, I'm not totally sure the time frame, but that survey we filled, it was in 2021. So this is kind of a long-term effort for us of really thinking about and revamping and planning and working with web designers and our own development team to really relaunch this website. So we're happy at this point to answer any questions. As I mentioned, if you don't have questions now, you can always leave a question through that feedback tab, or still just email the Gateway Help Desk at help@g2aging.org. Let's see, we just have one person asked, when do you expect the full website to be launched? I'll let Human. I don't think we have an exact date, but maybe Human, you could give a suggestion.
So yeah, we are still in the process of testing to make sure everything is working as expected, but we don't have a set date yet. We are still working on the date.
Yeah, I think that's also a good point, is that we're kind of testing. And so if for instance, we don't always use the same web browser, maybe the same type of computer, or maybe there's something specific to your setup and it's not working well. That's, I think if you see anything looking weird, we want to get those things fixed before we fully launch it and it replaces the current site. So, please, as much as you have time, please play around and give us feedback. All right, so if there aren't any extra questions, thank you. Thanks everyone for joining today, and I hope it's kind of been informative and it made you think like, oh, I want to play around on this the new website and give the team feedback. So thank you. And as I said, we'll have there are a few slides from the beginning and recording this webinar placed on the Gateway. So if you have students or colleagues that you think might be interested in playing around, also they could certainly watch this and look out for when we do fully replace the new site. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Human.
Thank you.
Bye.